our textbook, will you be drawing a lot from our textbook? Should we be
Yes. Now, let me explain. It may seem like I'm not. For chapter 1, which is really my favorite chapter, I won't draw as much from the text. But for the other chapters, chapters 2 through 13, I'll be drawing heavily from the text. Chapter 1 is unique. As we'll find out in a little bit. I mean, chapter 1 is really very unique. Chapter 1, folks, is about the kings. Yes?
Where can we get one?
The textbook? All right. I believe the question is, where do we get the textbook? Yeah, you can go to the bookstore. Now, here's the thing now, folks, about the text. I don't really care where you get it. The authors must be Dwyker and Spielberg. But if you get, this is the 7th edition. If you get the 6th edition, the 5th edition, even the 1st, I don't care. What I do care about is they must be Dwyker and Spielberg. Here's why. Believe it or not, ancient history, I've never seen 2 textbooks that are alike. They're all very, very different, and they're all subject to interpretation. So it must be Dwyker and Spielberg. Now, I don't care that while these people put out the Essential World History, which cuts out half of it. I don't care. I've taught the Essential World History at another college. D-U-I-K-E-R and S-P-I-E-L-V-O-G-E-L. Spielberg. Now, somebody asked me at the end of the last class, is this online? It seemed like I've heard a rumor that it is. You're welcome to look it up. If they have a CD available, it's much cheaper. That is fine with me. Now, having said that, I mean, I'm telling you, you need to buy the text, folks. And I know most of you probably don't have it yet, and I understand because I put 2 of my children through college. Well, the second one is now entering her last semester at the University of Georgia. And a lot of teachers understand do not require books. The history is primarily reading. I do expect to have the book. Now, having said that, you're in college now. I'm not going to go around the room with a checklist that says, show me your textbook, and knock points off of the ones of you who don't have one. It's up to you to either get one or not. My apologies. The closing bell on Wall Street. And I forgot that software was still up and running. Somebody at the door. Somebody's at the door. All right. It's unlocked. I mean, you could pull it open. Oh, go ahead. Come on in. All right. Last semester, they kept that door locked. Now this one's locked, but it will open. All right. Anyway, so hopefully that's for the text. If you can find a way to get it online, if you go to not to iCollege, but if you go to eBay and you can find it there. If you try to borrow it from the library, folks, forget it. The library does not have enough copies to go around. But you can go to Amazon. Again, I've had students do that, get a used one. I don't care. History, though, is primarily reading. I do want you to read the text. This text is, by the way, Dwyker and Spielberg are the most popular professors to write a history textbook for an entry-level history course. It's the most commonly used book, and this school was used the entire 16 years I have taught here. In the meantime, they've changed American history books at least 3 times or 4, but this is the same. All right. Anyway, and if you want to get the ISBN number, I had the students at the end of the last class come here with their cameras and wanted to take a picture of it. I'll let you do it. It's okay with me. Any way you can get it legally, fine and dandy. All right. Now, oh yeah, but I'll tell you something. You can laugh if you want to, but it's been a few years ago at another college. I had a young person come up to me and said, Mr. Tom, can you Xerox the pages for me? In one word, folks, I had to say no. I had just finished taking a course on plagiarism where they warned me of the dangers. This is copyrighted material. Now, he came back a few days later and said a friend of his had Xeroxed it for him. Oh, I was supposed to report it. I have to tell you, I didn't. This is copyrighted material. I cannot Xerox it, and it's illegal for you to Xerox it and distribute it to your classmates. Just be forewarned.
Xerox copy.
Xerox copy. Yeah, Xerox copy machine. Take it from a copy machine and distribute it. Don't ask me to do that for you. I mean, this young man was somewhat impoverished anyway, and I can appreciate that. I mean, on a very personal note, I'll tell you what, I grew up in poverty. So I can understand what poverty is. But there's some things I can do and will do, and some things I just simply cannot do. All right. Now, any other questions? Yes.
What's your name?
Name? Cunningham. Yeah, a Scottish name. All right. That's on. Oh, now, probably most of you didn't. The syllabus has been on iCollege for about 4 or 5 days now. By any chance, do any of you have it? Okay, hopefully you downloaded it since Saturday, because on Saturday I made about 2 little bitty changes. If it's not, if you downloaded before Saturday, that's fine. 2 or 3 changes I made on it, but I won't make any more changes as far as not after this. Because this syllabus I've turned into the front office already, and this is the one I planned, and I do stick to the syllabus fairly closely. Now, barring something unforeseen, now there's always a chance there'll be snow days. There have been the last couple of years. But as of now, the first test is February 1st. Pass 1. You might have, what's Pass 1? It's something this school has started to require about 3 semesters ago. There'll be 3 passes. The first pass is on primary versus secondary. And there will be, by tomorrow, if I am able to, by tomorrow, there will be a study guide for the pass. There will not be a study guide for the rest of the course. I've had more trouble with those things than you can imagine. But so sorry, folks, no study guides. 2 things. This is your study guide, number 1. Number 2, the lectures that I put online also are your study guides. Yeah, I do place my lectures online on iCollege for you to have access to them. Yes?
Are the tests cumulative, or are they just?
The test, the final exam will be cumulative. The test will cover, the first test, test 1, will cover chapter 1 only. The second test will cover chapters 2 and 3. Then the third test will cover chapters 4 and 5. You'll have your first 3 tests before the drop deadline. At least if all goes as planned. Your first 3 tests to be before the drop deadline. And if you just simply see that you can't keep up, there are always students who have trouble with my test. I don't know why 2/3 of the pupils who register my class make A's and B's. Most of the rest of them make C's. But I have 1 or 2 in every class who somehow just simply seemingly cannot keep up. Folk, I don't know why. But that it is a problem. It might be lack of preparation, lack of attendance, or any one of a number of reasons, excessive work. Hey, I once sat in your place in my senior year. I went my senior year as an honor student, and my grades dropped down drastically. So, I mean, a whole lot of work and a whole lot of other issues that came up, and my grades dropped down. It can happen. And anyway, 30 and 40 years down the road, the most important thing you'll have from this school is called a transcript. It can determine whether you get a job or whether you don't work, so it is important. Transcript, in case you don't know, that's a sheet of paper containing your grades, your records here. So, all right. Excuse me a moment. Okay, moving on. Text, Dwight and Spiegelville. Now, there will be a paper required. The instructions for the paper are on the syllabus. 2 sample papers in iCollege, and I've asked them, what format do I observe? I don't observe any type of format. I mean, the reason is, folks, this may sound bad, but it's been more than 40 years since I was in school, and this Chicago format or whatever, I am not familiar with myself. So basically just adhere to fundamental grammar, double space typing. Yeah, adhere to fundamental grammar. Now, here's something I'm going to count all points for them. By the way, the paper is going to be placed on Turnitin.com. Some of you are probably familiar with Turnitin already. I understand high schools are now using it. It's designed to curb plagiarism. there's about 3 or 4 things I check for right away when I first looked at paper. Of course, number one is something I can see before I even open up the paper is what's the plagiarism score. Now, a score of 25% or less, I don't care about. I mean, I had a student sit right in the front row here a few times. I was so upset, had a plagiarism score of 12%. Tried to explain to me here. I made some records. I said, hey, 12%. Turn it in, doesn't care. I don't care. But when it gets up past 25%, we begin to wonder if you didn't copy some. A plagiarism count of 50% or better, and that shows serious issues. On the syllabus, I say I will dock off points for your paper if it's got a plagiarism count above 75%. I mean, I did have one young student last semester who copied and pasted from Wikipedia. Bad, 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 really bad. And they turned it in and caught it right away. I mean, just instantly. Don't try that. Now you can see your plagiarism score. Yes?
Does Turnitin count quoted material as part of the plagiarism?
They don't know the difference yet. So that's why you're going to have, if you quote anything, you're going to have a plagiarism count of 10 to 15%, maybe 3 or 4%. You're going to have, I mean, let me tell you something now. I dread looking at a paper when the plagiarism count is 0. You might say, hey, yeah, it shows originality all right. But it usually shows a very, very poorly written paper. Very bad. And I just about dread looking at it. So if the plagiarism count is, 4, but they do count quotes. So don't do an excessive amount of quotation. I mean, do your own writing. And yes, feel free to put in a few quotes here and there. Now, something that is becoming an increasing problem, and I'm going to try to curb this semester. If you write about a topic that is past the year 1500, I'm going to knock off points for it. No, don't write about Napoleon Bonaparte. He lived in the late 17 and early 1800s. And one person wrote about the Ferguson police shooting. I mean, hey, don't write about that. It's not in the topic, folk. Now, write about something that has to do with world history up to 1500. Believe me, there's a whole world of stuff to write about. I mean, between philosophy, religion, persons, events, conflicts, wars. The samples, I give some sample papers. By the way, the samples are not part of, I mean, they're from another school, so don't try to figure out who wrote the sample. But one of them has to do with America, and it was American history class at another school. Don't try to do the same thing and write about, well, if you look at the sample, you see what it is, modern day American history. But I couldn't, I mean, there's some papers that I read that just simply stand out in my memory. And from time to time, I'll quote a paper that a student has written. But the one that stands out most was written by a person from the Middle East. And he was writing about how crummy America is. And he said, in the United States, our senators often disagree with our president. Now, oh, isn't that just terrible? Isn't that awful? I got something to tell you. My wife sometimes disagrees with me. And sometimes I wind up, I've thought about it, agreeing with her. I mean, but he talked about that we in our country, we once had a 4-year-long civil war. I got something to tell you, where he came from, they have not had 4 years of civil peace in 1,000 years. Yes, but that's one of the sample papers. And of course, watch the grammar. See, the things I check on. Number 1, what's the plagiarism count? Number 2, what's the word count? Turnitin counts the word. If the word count is too low, don't worry about it being too high. If the word count is too low, I will knock off points. What's the word count? Number 3, are the pages numbered? And surprisingly, a lot of pupils, you can number. You have to learn how to number pages on a computer. I mean, and folk, it's easy to do. But I get a lot of pupils who cannot number the pages on a word text. By the way, all of you should be using Word. You may know that this students at this school can download or can acquire Microsoft Office 365 for free. You've probably all been told that. Right? Anyway, you can, at University of Georgia, they can also. So you can get Microsoft Office 365, but you have to learn how to number the pages. Then I look for, is there a title page? And I'm surprised how many students, I tell you, I'm going to take off about 3 points if you don't put a title page, and a lot of students won't. Then I'll take off points if there's no bibliography. Cite your sources. It's considered good writing practice. Tell where you got your info from. You don't need to use footnotes. But anyway, footnotes, endnotes are not required anymore, but citing your sources, definitely yes. And yeah, okay. Hey, I'll tell you something, folks. I spent 27 years at Lockheed, and engineers do not know how to write. And almost every scientist will tell you later in life, they say, I wish I'd have paid more attention in English class. But they would, to get money from the government, they had to write reports. And Lockheed would assist them by hiring a whole bunch of editors to proofread your paper, editors who knew a little bit about science. But you'd be surprised how many Lockheed engineers would put down something like, I have done this, I've done this experiment 3 times. If you're not laughing, you should be. And expect that the government's going to give them money for their project. No, I've done this experiment. No, you didn't done it. Anyway. Okay, anyway, watch the grammar, watch the punctuation. A lot of college students don't know how to use commas. That's something you need to learn, folks, when to use commas and when not to. All right, yes.
Is that paper going to be due?
If it's on the syllabus, it's, say again the question.
I think it would be due near the end of the semester?
Pretty close to the end, but I'm making it due earlier so I'll have more time to grade it. Around April, sometime in April. It's on the syllabus.
Okay, and you just literally...
Well, all right, I'll give you a better answer than that. I have the syllabus here. The paper is due. All right, there's 3 due dates. Papers due for early turn-in on April 6th. In other words, I give extra credit if you turn in on April 6th. They're actually due on April 13th. And I take off points if it's late after April 13th. And I take off more points if it's turned in after April 20th. Now, I'll tell you something about taking off the points. If you turn your paper in before April 6th, I promise you, I'll try my best to overlook any errors you make or make it, or just grade it easy as I can. And if you turn it in after April 20th, I promise you I'm going to read it and reread it and then reread it again to see if I can find another excuse to take off more points. I mean, I'm human too. I mean, it makes a difference, folk. You'd be surprised in the semester how many times I come up with an average. This student has an average of 89, 79, 69. If you know what I mean, it's a borderline grade. I can't bump them up. You make an 89, I have to give you a B. You make a 79. See, now, you notice I left out 59. I have taken 58 and 59 averages, fudged a little bit, and brought them up to a D. I won't give very many Fs, except for students who just simply quit coming in, or students who don't turn in a paper or don't miss. I had one student last semester, it doesn't happen often, who missed the final exam. And if he had been at the class, I mean, I post the dates of my test, folks. If he'd been to class the last 2 days before the final, he'd have known when. If he'd have checked the syllabus, he'd have known when the final was. If he'd have checked the college website, he'd have known when the final was. He wrote me about to Mr. Cunningham. I got mixed up. I missed the final exam. All I can say is it's too late. I can't do anything about it. He got an F for the course. Yes.
The syllabus, the date for test 1 says January 27th.
You caught me red-handed and flat-footed because the February 1st was for the other class.
Yeah.
Let me see. All right, I tell you, I'm terribly embarrassed. Wait a minute, January 27th. The other class is a hybrid class. That only meets on Mondays. There'll be a different test date, and I just didn't check, double check. Good for you. You caught red-handed, flat-footed. It's not the first time. Maybe I'm getting old. I don't know. All right. January 27th. All right. Anyway, grades, I tell you on the syllabus how I figure the grades. The pass does count as part of your test. There'll be 3 pass. I don't throw out any of the pass. They all 3 count. On the others, you have 5 tests. I'll throw out 1 of them, the low score. So I tell you how the grades are computed. You can look at it yourself. I talked to a math teacher one time who said any student who can't figure out his own grades, he does not allow in class. But folks, it's just a matter of simply adding up the numbers and dividing by 9. But anyway, you add your test scores 4 times, add your final exam 2 times, add your pass 1 time, add your paper grade 2 times, and you add it up, see, and divide by 9. That's your average. Again, the syllabus explains that in more detail. The grades I put there as an example were taken from an actual student, except I fudged a little bit. I changed the numbers so you don't think anybody's going to ever guess who the grades were, but it was from a student who started off heading for an A and wound up dropping that A down to a B by easing up toward the end of the semester. And yes, it's easy to do. Losing interest maybe, or getting busy, getting involved. It's easy to do. All right. Some of the things I want you to be looking for as we go through the semester. I've got 5 things I've listed, and this is some I've never listed on a syllabus before. One thing issue is what happens when the government starts helping poor people. As you know, should the government help the poor? And there have been several times throughout the history of mankind when the government got involved in trying to help the poor people. Sounds like a noble thing to do. What's been the result? We'll talk about that through the semester. Which direction does mankind head over time? I mean, lately, of course, obviously we're going uphill. Today's computers are better than they were 20 years ago. Today's automobiles are better than they were 20 years ago. Today's climate control is better. But most of the time, throughout much of history, mankind has tended to slide downward. Why is that? Land redistribution. Now here's something. I mean, has it done any good? There have been several times when governments have taken excess land from the rich and given it to the poor. What has been the result? Basically redistribution of wealth. Now here's one. Hot issues still. Most of that, all these are still hot issues. Has the climate ever bobbed up and down throughout history? Number one, and what effect has climate change had on life? I want to tell you right now, folks, notice the hotter it gets, the better it gets. The colder it gets, the worse it gets. The Great Plagues of the 1300s were caused by global cooling. That killed not only a third of Europe, I'm talking about the Black Death, that killed a third of Europe's population, but also killed millions of people in China and India and in Mongolia, and probably killed a bunch of people among the American Indians. Cooling has been the worst thing that could happen to man, warming up. All right. Folk, there was a time during the Cretaceous period, that's spelled C-R-E-A-T-E-O-U-S, when the whole world had a uniform tropical climate. Even Antarctica, down at the bottom, had tropical climate. No winter, no snow. And life on Earth was never better during this time of heat. I mean, this was the age of the 300-foot trees.
Turtles the size of pool tables.
What's that?
Turtles the size of pool tables.
Well, that too, not to mention that here in Georgia, we had sloths the size of elephants. We had buffalo that were bigger than today's elephants.
Really,
We had, what's that?
really big bugs.
Big bugs, I suspect so. Yeah, we had, well, life was never better. This was the age of the dinosaurs. How many of you have heard this before? I mean, the Cretaceous period. All right, I have several hands that are going up. Yes. So what we might need to do is see if we can make the Earth a little bit hotter. Anyway, the colder it gets, the worse it gets. Anyway, climate change. And folks, not only that, in the late 1600s, that's after our time period, there was a period of time called a Little Ice Age, when it's known that the Earth's climate cooled. And during the Little Ice Age, millions of people died in the Northern Hemisphere. I mean, died out of turn, young, including as far south as India. Millions upon millions of people died in the Northern Hemisphere. Little Ice Age. Now, and here, this final one. This might cause some of you want to leave the class, but I'm going to throw out the question. I won't answer it now. What happens to societies when they have equality between the sexes, when men and women are equal? This is something I'm going to save for later. Your authors say so without knowing that they're saying. I don't even think they realize they're saying so. But they actually will tell you when the sexes are looked on as being equal with equality. What happens to the society? All right. That's fine. You'll find that on, there's a still hot issues. You'll find that on the syllabus. The questions are asked. They're not answered. Okay, so I took the liberty to answer one of them now. The one about the heat and the climate. All right. I can readily see most of you don't have your book, and I don't blame you. They're expensive, and like I say, having put 2 children through college already, I can understand, because most teachers do not require them. That's my understanding anyway. I do. However, like I say, if you don't get one, if I've had students who did not buy a book but listen to the lectures, you can get 80 to 90% of the questions right just to listen to the lectures. But you'll always be 1 or 2 that I throw in. It's from the book that I did not mention in class. You're all responsible for it. All right. Oh yeah, about the paper again. Pick your topic. You're on your own as long as it has to do with world history. Up to 1500. Yes.
It's just like any topic that's happened.
Yeah, any topic at all. I mean, a popular topic is Alexander the Great. There's also Julius Caesar. But there's religions. Most notably, a rather hot topic today is Islam. When I was young, we almost completely ignored the Islamic world. Today, it's on the news every day, 2 or 3 times a day. Something's going on in that part of the world. It's been said that the first thing a college teacher should do is to try to pry open closed, complacent minds. I don't know what your impression was of mankind's beginnings. Prepare, though, to receive a few shockers. Shocker number 1. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. First of all, what is history? How do we get history? This is part of Pass 1. Primary sources, folk. How we got history is the people who lived at the time wrote about an event, and from that we construct our history. The persons who constructed their secondary. You might be writing thousands of years after the event, but you look and read what did the ancient people, or what did the people at the time say about an event. So, a primary source, an example, is a soldier who took part in the Battle of Waterloo, who wrote memoirs about it. That's primary. The memoirs of General Grant, who participated in the Civil War as a general, his memoirs considered primary sources. He wrote about what he saw when he lived at the time. That's a primary source. Secondary source are historians who take primary events and write about them. All right. Here's a problem, though, with primary sources from the ancient world. Most of them are copies of copies of copies. For instance, with Aristotle, we don't have an original that Aristotle actually wrote. We have somebody copied it and somebody else copied it. Now, a person over here might have copied it. Another person over here might have copied it slightly different. So we have to try to piece together, now what did Aristotle actually say in the original? For the most part, we think we know. Even the Bible is a copy of a copy of a copy. We don't have an original. Now, we do come to a group of people, though, where we have original sources. These are the Sumerians. The Sumerians are said to be the founders of civilization. Now again, some scholars say, well, the South American civilizations are just as old, or perhaps the civilization we find in India is just as old, perhaps. It's not like any of them are older than the Sumerians. The Sumerians are said to have been the persons who first tamed the dog, the cow, the cat, the domestic cat. Yeah.
Weren't they also the first people who started farming?
Say again. Oh, that's probably for farming. The Sumerians. That's what I'm getting to that. If they started, you're asking if they started farming. Yeah. Well, they were the inventors. I mean, they were the first persons believed to have farmed wheat, and corn and rye and barley and oats. They tamed the donkey, the horse, the equines, and they invented the wheel. They also are said to have invented schools, been the inventors of writing. They were the first people we call civilized. They wrote on clay tablets. Their clay tablets, they would write and they would fire them up. Now see, this is important because other people wrote on reeds or wrote on skins. But these people wrote on clay tablets. They fired these tablets up to make them permanently hard. Then for 2,000 or 3,000 years, people forgot that they were there. Then we go back and read what they wrote. These are as original as you can get, folk. And we have hundreds of thousands of these clay tablets. Some of them are nothing more than inventories. Inventories of who the slaves were, where people lived. All right. That's as original as you can get. And there's somebody asking the other class this one, how did we learn to read them? Well, simply, among the tablets we found were lexicons. If any of you know anything about writing, you have dictionaries that have a word defined in its own language. A lexicon has a word in one language and beside it the meaning in another language. I have in my house a Spanish-English lexicon where the first part of it is English to Spanish, the next part of it is Spanish to English. That's a lexicon. And among the writings we found lexicons that have a language that we do know. So we're able to decipher the language over a period of time. And we found that their language probably was tonal. In other words, if we could hear it, they seemed to have sung to each other. The same word in one tone meant this, in a higher pitched tone it meant something else. Their language also was one that belongs in the family of languages that's totally unrelated to any other language on the face of the earth. They have no known relatives. And again, if you look up languages, folks, like I did not too long ago, there are a lot of languages that have no known relatives. And I'll get to that in a little bit, if not today, then by Wednesday. Why is this? Because a lot of people believe that language evolved. I mean, well, in today's world, radio and television does a lot to keep our language standardized. Movies, yeah, every movie you see in English, they speak a standard form of English. But 150, 200 years ago, the South was speaking a somewhat slightly different language than the North was. And it would have eventually perhaps evolved into two different languages. Spanish and Portuguese are a lot alike, but a Spanish-speaking person without training cannot understand Portuguese, and a Portuguese without training cannot understand Spanish. But otherwise, they're a lot alike, but they evolve. Somehow or another, there's some languages, like over 100 of them, that seem to have no relative, no other. Sumerian is like that. Now, okay, now, getting to what the Sumerians actually said. Well, here's the shocker. We don't believe what they told us. We look on their stories. I mean, the fancy word for it is myth. And another way of saying it is fairy tale. Yes?
So the culture of the story,
Speak a bit louder. I have to admit, I'm hard of hearing. Speak a little louder.
is that the culture that made the story of Gilgamesh?
This is the culture that made the story of Gilgamesh. You're jumping ahead of me a little bit, but thank you. This is the story that gave us Gilgamesh, the culture. Yes?
Aren't the Sumerians like the first civilization to ever mention aliens?
You are jumping on me. I'll get to answer that. Yeah, you're jumping ahead of me. Yes?
But I thought that they had proof that the Gilgamesh story really existed. Didn't they find a boat or something?
You're jumping a little bit ahead of me. Now, did Gilgamesh actually exist? Hey, I'm going to get around to all three of your questions before this period's out, I promise you. Now, did he actually exist? All right, depends on what you believe. Now, there are three ways that fairy tales begin. A fairy tale typically begins with long ago and far away. Now, a more common beginning is once upon a time. Now, there is a third beginning to a fairy tale. It begins with back when I was in the Army. I was in the Army once myself for 6 years. But anyway, back when I was in the Army, and what Paul, and they always have a certain ending, catchy ending. How do fairy tales usually end? And they lived happily ever after. And I saw this cartoon one time of a father reading to his young daughter, and they lived happily ever after on Social Security. It's a book of fairy tales, by the way. All right, what am I getting at? All right, the Sumerians told us that their gods maintain a physical flesh and blood presence in their temples. I see at least one head on. Folk, I'm not going to say whether they did or didn't. The issue is, I mean, okay, we go to these faculty and we're told it's about you pupils. It's not about us teachers. But I got something to explain to you. Maybe about you pupils also. It's about those people who lived back then. You have to understand them to really understand why they acted the way they did, what they did. They believed that their gods not only maintained a physical presence in the temple, but sometimes their gods became attracted to earth women and had children by earth women, cohabited with earth women. And one of the children was named Gilgamesh. Yes. Gilgamesh was, Gilgamesh was more god than he was human. Go ahead. Did I answer?
There were no female gods?
No, okay. Yes, there were. Oh, yes, there were. There were some female gods also. That's how come Gilgamesh was more god than he was man, because his father was all the way a god and his mother was half god.
Weren't a lot of ancient societies matriarchal rather than patriarchal?
A few of them were, yes. A few. I mean, they had female, they had goddesses. Now, the Sumerian name for their gods, Anu, Enki, Enlil, Marduk, Nabu, and yes, they had a goddess, Inanna, Ninhursag, I don't know. And among the Egyptians, there are numerous goddesses, the most famous being Isis. And yes, Isis is making a lot of news today, and according to rumor, Isis has been worshipped all the way down through time, but in secret. The secret societies have been worshiping Isis all the way down through. And I'll have more to say about Isis when we come to Egypt, of course.
What is she the god of again?
She was a goddess of Egypt. I'll have more to say about her later. All right. Anyway, they believed that their gods maintained a physical presence in the temple. Now, folks, it wasn't just the Sumerians. All the ancient peoples believed that the gods sometimes had children by earth women. Everybody in every class knows this. The question we're about to ask you. But who was Hercules' father? Zeus. I mean, I think most of you have heard that. Hercules was part human. Now, again, if Hercules exists or not, the people living in Messenia claim to be descended from Hercules' children. I mean, if you may know the story, Hercules married a woman, and his wife and all of his children died. Then he married again and had a bunch of other children, and the Messenians claimed descent from him. Alexander the Great also claimed he was descended from both Achilles and Hercules. I'll have more to say about Alexander, of course, later. Every ancient society believed this, folks, that the gods were once here on earth. Again, no, as the question was asked, weren't they the inventors of aliens? They believed that the gods came down from heaven and dwelt in earth temples, and at times even cohabited with earth women. Again, folks, I'm not prepared to prove they actually did, but I can prove from the records that the ancients believed they did, and that is what matters a lot. Whether or not you believe in this mythology, and I've asked students, what do you think? And most of them think that these people had a vivid imagination. All right, believe what you will. But how do you explain these people were so creative? Where did their language come from? Where did their civilization come from? How did they invent all these things at once? They claim that these gifts they had were an invention from their gods. or a legacy given to them from the God. Again, you can believe what you want to, folk, but what is important? You have to understand what these people thought. Again, we look on their stories as being fairy tales. A story of the son of Apollo, the sun god, decided he wanted to fly his father's chariot one day across the skies and got too low and almost burned the earth up. The Greeks actually, this was part of their religion. How many of you have heard that story? All right. Okay, several of you, yeah. I know this. All right. Sumerians. They are said to, their religion is said to be the father of all other religions, and you find offshoots of their religion among the Greeks, the Romans, the Norsemen, the Scandinavians, the Egyptians, and even as far off as far away China. All mankind seems to have had its beginnings right around this region of Sumeria, and from there scattered abroad over the face of the whole globe. All right. They were the founders of the stories that we today would call mythologies. Yes?
Geographically speaking, is Samaria similar to the Mesopotamian area?
Sumeria, I should have told you that at the beginning. Thank you. Sumeria is located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in the southern part, near where the two rivers come together. It's a land called Mesopotamia, which means middle of the rivers. Middle of the rivers, Mesopotamia, and it's between the two rivers, near where they join. It's in the southern part, what is today's southern, southern Iraq. Very important. Southern Iraq, yes, Sumeria. All right. Now, folk, they also had a flood story. Now, I want to state this about the flood story. Every ethnic group, everywhere you go, you find a flood story. As far as I know, there are no exceptions. It's there. It's not just something that came out of the Bible. The flood story is found among the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, the Latin American Indians, the Far East, the Chinese, the Indian people. Universally, it's found all over the globe. And among the Chinese, even pronounce the hero's name Noe. At least I've been told that. If any of you from China want to elaborate on that, you're welcome to. They even pronounce it the same way that the Hebrew Bible did. They all had stories of dinosaurs. Well, I'll give it away. Dragon stories. I mean, they all believed in dragons up until, nobody questioned the existence of dragons until around the year 1500. Well, actually, about the year 1600, somebody said dragons don't exist. Up until that time, not only did people believe in it, but they spotted them. In Europe, St. Columba spotted a dragon.
There's a Leviathan.
Leviathan in the Bible, yes. Behemoth in the Bible. Leviathan. Beowulf. Beowulf, if he lived at all, would have lived around the year 600. And Beowulf's sister is a real historical figure, married one of the kings of Denmark. There are other historical figures in the Beowulf story. And also, Beowulf was a dragon killer. Killed, including some flying dragons. Now, standard history would tell you, oh, dinosaurs ceased to exist. All right, I'm jumping around the story a little bit. The dragons, when they're described or drawn, they have a remarkable resemblance to dinosaur bones put together. Remarkable. Indicating that these, and also we have found dinosaur bones today that have soft tissue. And folk, if any of you can explain how tissue remains soft for 65 million years, I'll let you hear it. Soft tissue. We found, basically these dinosaurs probably only have been dead for a short time, maybe a few hundred years at the very most. All right, I see one head nodding no, believe what you will. If you want to, right here, folk. Now, I promise you, this is not creationist literature. Not at all. This is National Geographic. It's as pro-evolution as they come. Oh, about 10 years ago, I paid this group $100 to have my DNA checked. But I'm about to send them $100 more to have my DNA checked again, because now they can do a much more detailed check and tell you if you're related to King Alfred the Great or King Charlemagne or some of those. You know, and I'll tell you, I want to explain, most of you Europeans are probably related to Alfred the Great. Here's why. Everybody alive today is probably descended from every European who was alive 1,000 years ago. You must, how can that be? Because you have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8, 16, 32. And I want to ask a question. You should all know it. If someone offered you $1 million outright, or offered you a penny today and double that penny tomorrow and double it every day for 30 days, which would you take? The penny doubled, the million outright? Take the penny doubled. You'd wind up after 30 days with $2 million. If you don't believe it, get on your computer and do the math. 2 to the 30th power equals 1 billion, plus the other billion you get the first 29 days. Makes for $2 billion. I've done it many a time over. What does this have to do with population? Simply, if you have, go back 30 generations, you have at least 2 million ancestors living around the year 1000.
They say like a sixth of the world population is related to Genghis Khan or something.
What's that?
Did they say like a sixth of the world population is related to Genghis Khan?
Yeah, about that's right. Yeah, related to Genghis Khan, and he lived about 900 years ago, 950 or so years ago. Now this, folk, what they discovered in 1986 was that every human female is descended from one woman. And a short time later, they discovered that every human male is descended from one man. So they wound up, they had to give a name to this woman and man. These names come from a book that is forbidden in our public schools. Forbidden. That is a question that you're going to have to ask the judges who forbade it. And ever since they forbade it, I want to say this about public school. I taught public school for 5.5 years. Well, my children never saw the inside. Public school teachers do not send their kids to public schools. Not very often, anyway. I was a public school teacher. Worst experience I've ever had. Why did I teach for 5 years? Because I took out a student loan to get through school, and you had to teach for 5 years to get that loan halfway forgiven. And I understand that law is still on the books. If you get a degree in teaching and teach for 5 years, you can get half your student loan forgiven. That's not at all. It's still in the books, right? Nobody seems to know. Yes.
In a college type classroom, I know it's a public university, but are we allowed to discuss things as the Bible, or?
Supposedly, okay. In an elementary school, but listen, you're adults.
Yeah.
Supposedly we have the freedom. It's called academic freedom. I say supposedly because there have been teachers recently fired, one of them I think should have been, who's told the parents of the massacre at Newington that the massacre at Newington was all staged, it was not real. That professor got fired. I mean, you know, it said I've got to hold my child for the last time, and you're saying that my child never existed. And they complained to the university and got that teacher fired. But anyway, suppose we have academic freedom, and my boss has told us at a meeting that he can say, and I say this tongue-in-cheek, anything you want to. Believe me, I'm careful what I say, though, and careful to be able to back up. Anyway, the name they gave to this woman, anybody know? And it's not Lucy. Eve. And they called the man Adam. Now, they will tell you that Adam lived much later than Eve did. You might say, how can that be? Well, Eve, of course, obviously had a husband. But have any of you heard a certain story that there was a catastrophe on this earth one time that took away everybody except for one man and his sons and their wives? But, folks, the flood story is not only written in cuneiform tablets. It's not only written in the Bible. It's not only passed down word of mouth. It's written in our genes.
Doesn't the Bible say that Noah is a descendant of Adam?
Noah was descended from Adam, yeah, but what I'm getting at, if the original Eve would have had millions of female descendants before the flood, then came the flood. And most of her descendants wiped out except for the wives, but apparently the wives of the sons of Noah were not sisters. Whereas Noah's sons, of course, were brothers. But the wives were not sisters. That's why the common denominator for the women would be farther back than the common denominator for the men. If that's hopefully I made that clear as I can't. That's why, that would explain to me why. And even some experts are now saying it looks like that humanity suffered a near catastrophe that nearly wiped all of them out. All right, at one point. Okay, for a late afternoon class, I would say this. I think most of you here would be very, very attentive and very wide awake and taking active part. Like I say, this is the one and only chapter where I would dare to deviate very far from what the authors say, even though I must include what the authors say. Now, the authors will start off by saying that mankind started out as being primitive, and they point out that we have found artifacts in caves. All right, I want to tell you something. Every generation of humanity has had cave people. In the modern world, we have people living in caves who have smartphones. We have bridge people living right here in Atlanta. Some of them have iPads, laptop computers. In France, there are caves that have high-quality artwork made of high-quality oil paintings, which tells me that these people, yes, they were living in cave, but they were living on the fringe of a more advanced civilization. The paint they bought was probably manufactured professionally by some high-quality engineers who knew how to make paint that last hundreds of years in a damp cave. Oh, yes. No, these people were living on the fringe. Today's cave people, such as you are, probably and bridge people, are living on the fringe of more advanced people. The fact that there are cave people proves nothing about how primitive the ancients were. Ancient man, to me, started off really, really high, and over time, mostly degenerated. Only in recent times has mankind started to pull himself by his own bootstraps, at least some of it, and better himself. Now, how do I know this? There have been all kinds of books written on this topic, all kinds of stories. Oh, and by the way, this map shows the human beings spread out. The female population starts out, folk. They all start out in Africa. But then they converge. The female population converges around a place called Mount Ararat. Anybody know what happened at Mount Ararat? That's where the ark supposedly landed when the flood was over. And the human female population then spread from Mount Ararat over the whole globe. The males, they got them starting in Africa, converging in the Middle East, basically in Sumer, and spreading out from Sumer over the whole globe. Here it is, folks. Look it up yourself. Y chromosome DNA or mitochondrial. It's for the women. It's mitochondrial DNA that shows all humans are brothers. It's called the Genographic Project. Again, I'm tempted, and one of these days I'm going to send them some more money and get my DNA checked again to find out if, in more detail, who I might be related to. Most interesting, to say the least. All right, leaving that. Dragon stories, oh yes. They killed the dragons oftentimes by breaking their arm. And if you look at dinosaur models, they show them with big, big stumpy back legs and weak front legs. Their weakness was their arms. If you could break the arm, they beat it. They had no way to fix them. Not quite like a horse. Man, if a horse breaks its leg, there's not much you can do with it but destroy it. These creatures break their arm. They could not handle themselves. They'd go into convulsions, likely go into convulsions, and shortly after would die. The Babylonians did this. They destroyed dragons the same way. Beowulf supposedly did the same thing, jumped at the dragon instead of running from it. But then dragon stories are found all over the globe, and killers of them are found also in folk. There are rumors that deep in the Congo there are dinosaurs still alive today, and they are spotted from time to time. If you want to look it up, look it up. It's on YouTube. It's on, you can find everything there. But I had some students sat right here a couple semesters ago, told me they started out, they were husband and wife team. They didn't believe me. They got to research by the end of the semester. They did a paper on dragons. They believed it. The soft tissue, that's real. The possible finding in the Congo, that's a possibility. Yes?
believe the creature in Beowulf was more described as a humanoid bear type, wasn't it?
No, the third creature was, you're talking about.
You're talking about
The third creature was
it's
dragon.
Grendel's mother.
Yeah, Grendel.
Depending on, yeah,
But the one with the arm ripped off.
That was Grendel.
That was
That
Grendel.
was-
Grendel, the Grendel, yeah.
And then
there's
Grendel's
a
mother
dragon.
came out for revenge. She was
Yeah.
a dragon.
Grendel. The way that some experts claim that from the description that Beowulf gives of Grendel, that they can tell exactly what genus and species of dinosaur that he would have fought. As for the other art, the giants, every ancient peoples had giant stories. Again, they were supposedly hybrids crossed between aliens, what call them, gods, foreign, and humans. They were the cross. Every people have these giant stories. Eventually, supposedly, all the giants were killed. The most famous giant story is the story of David killing the giant Goliath. You can believe what you want to, folk, but the Bible is not as far from the only. I mean, what the Sumerians have to say would make some of the stories in the Bible appear tame by comparison. The Sumerians were far more fantastic. All right, now. Okay, for 14 minutes. On page 12 in your book, and this might help some of you decide to buy the book, there is a very famous, I don't know what to call it. Your book calls it a poem. If you look it up on the internet, you'll find that they call it a poem. And I had a student in my morning, when my 1 o'clock class say, wasn't this just a poem? You can believe what, here's the lines. Is destroyed. Bitter is its lament. The country's blood now fills the holes like bronze fills a mold. Bodies dissolve like fat in the sun. Our temple is destroyed. Our gods have abandoned us. Like migrating birds, they took off and flew off. Smoke lies on our city like a shroud. All right, first of all, is one of Sumer's cities. Does anybody recall what famous biblical character started off in
Gilgamesh.
Not Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was Uruk. Gilgamesh is not a biblical character, by the way. Even though the Bible does mention Uruk, it calls it Erech. Yes?
Is that the Pillar of Salt story?
It was a male person. Right?
Yeah, a male person. What was his name? Abraham. Ancestor of the Jewish people. Abraham started from in Ur, and he was told to leave Ur. And supposedly, according to some people who studied shortly after he left Ur, the city of Ur was destroyed in what sounds like a nuclear holocaust. Yeah, what? That's a good question. You say we didn't develop nuclear up to 1945. All right. Not only does it look like Ur was destroyed, I've heard nuclear holocaust, but in India, the city of Mohenjo-Daro, in Africa, there is some glass that cannot be formed by any other means other than the heat of a nuclear blast. All right.
Same thing with Sodom.
Sodom and Gomorrah, yes. In the case of, all right, when Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed, they found some, if this sounds gross, I'm sorry, but folk were adults now. They found some salt mounds. And what made this salt? And to analyze it was people who had once been alive, who had been exposed to the extreme heat, and every part of the body had the water had dissolved with it, and what was left was a pile of salty substance. And you go to the area where Sodom and Gomorrah existed, it says that Lot's wife, when she lagged behind, went too slow, turned into salt. We found a bunch of salt right there around the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. Supposedly, now some people believe that the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah spread east to Ur and destroyed Ur. Abraham had already left the city. And then went on farther 1,000 miles east and destroyed Mohenjo-Daro in India. Others say, oh no, mankind had not developed a nuclear bomb yet. If you read the Vedas, folk, V-E-D-A-S, which we'll talk about in the next chapter, the Vedas talk about interplanetary space wars. I see one head nodding, two heads nodding. You've read it before, heard it before. 3 heads, I believe, nodding. Space wars, mass destruction. 2 sides got together one day and agreed we won't use weapons of mass destruction. But when one side started losing, it resorted to a weapon of mass destruction in one of their wars. Then the other side did too, and they wound up having a super holocaust. And Mohenjo-Daro is still highly radioactive to this day, 3,000 years later. Now, I had the students last spring. This time I had to write a paper on Mohenjo-Daro. Regrettably, I did not like the results. Some of the students believed it, and most of them were skeptical, and I can tell most of you are probably skeptical that you can believe what you want to, folk. I'm laying out for you.
Oh, so you're saying the ancient people have the same tech that we have?
Except one difference. Theirs was higher than ours is. All right. What proof do I have? Who built the pyramids? Who built the pyramids? The Egyptians. How did they build them? Could we build the pyramids with our technology today? There have been more than one scholar who has said that no, we don't have the means to lift these heavy stones 400 feet into the air. They did it. Not only that, but the city of Costco in South America, where the stones were quarried at sea level, and the cliff rises straight up 13,000 feet. You can't go from sea level to 13,000 feet fast. You have to take it your days to get there because your body, you can't get enough oxygen. Your body has to act. Well, they went from ground level straight up 13,000 feet with heavy stones that we could not do with our technology today.
And it's just like the tablets that you said the Sumerians made. They have them like in museums that depict, space shuttles and like people.
They have drawings of astronauts. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. You know, their technology, that's the point I'm trying to make, was far advanced from ours. And then they declined over time, and only recently some of us, have begun to regain what we once had lost. Okay.
So we're basically the dark age for that?
Compared to them, I suspect we're in the dark. And also, I had a student write a paper last time talking about the dumbing down of modern man, and gave some examples. And one is, so much of our young people today are spending so much time playing computer games that it's destroying their mentality. Watching too much television is destructive. Because when you read a book, your mind forms a picture. Watching TV, that video box forms a picture. Anyway, go ahead.
There's no evidence of any.
The evidence is all over the place.
If the pyramids were left, why not the machines that built the pyramids? If there was anything beyond that.
They might not have built them with machines. They might not have built with anything that we could call machines. There are other rumors around about they used to move those stones nothing more than hollowed out earthen pitchers, of which we have a lot of. I mean, P-I-T-C-H-E-R, pitcher, of which they got a sound resonant, and this sound canceled out the pull of gravity and made it easier for them to move large stones. That is one thing. There would not need to be machines. In fact, machines might have gotten in their way. No, the machinery. Well, also about the machines, we are finding computer-like machines at the bottom of the ocean or in the cities. We found batteries, nickel plating. If you know anything about nickel plating is used on trombone mouthpieces, trumpet mouthpieces. Nickel plating can be done with electricity. The ancients had nickel plating. Yes?
Couldn't something like water hydraulics be used to lift the stones of the pyramids?
That has been theorized. That has been theorized. And there
electronics?
would not need to be machinery, but you still have some issues with how do you get them from water. Okay. How do you get them moved from 600 miles south of where the pyramid is, and with no evidence of a trail between where they were quarried and where they are now? No evidence of a
You have a
trail.
lot of water pressure with the Nile River, though.
The Nile River has about 3 cataracts, which I'll talk about later. It drops off with no evidence they ever got around. Or that's a cataract where you move. All right. They'd say you could have floated the logs. Floated the stones on logs. There's a problem with that. There are no forests in Egypt. Haven't been. And they rolled the stones on logs. Another problem. There are no forests in Egypt.
Yeah.
All right. And also, there's no trail. When they came to a cataract, there was a waterfall. There's no evidence that they got the stones around the cataract. In fact, there's no evidence of any trail that leads from where the stones were quarried to where they're found. All right. Leaving that for the moment. Yeah, go ahead.
Here, like the Coral City in Florida.
Yeah, Coral Gables. Yes, indeed. I'll tell you. Yeah, the man, there was a truck driver who was doing badly, and all of a sudden he found this job of hauling stones to the Coral Gables Castle every day. He was told, leave your truck bed behind and take your tractor, go home, come back tomorrow, pick up your bed. This man put together Coral Gables, and we don't know how he did it.
He's like a 60-year-old.
Yeah, he put together the stones. He would unload the truck, And the man who drove the truck would come back the next day, pick up something, and go and haul another load. And he actually got financially on firm footing by hauling these stones every day between the quarry and the Coral Gables Castle. And some of you have heard the story. Made a living. Was it?
Yeah,
Yeah, Coral Castle.
Coral Castle. Okay, whatever. All right. Anyway, that's in modern time. Now, did the ancients have a stone moving technique, folk? It appears that they did. All right. In other words, yes. How smart were they? Really, really, really. And we are, if anything, we have dumbed down.
Yeah, I feel like we definitely, especially with like technology nowadays, like we think we know everything because we have Google and everything.
Yeah.
There's
Well,
no way that
what I'm
we
going
know.
to get to eventually, you have to pardon my cold. On a practical level, we can make better automobiles. We can make better plastics. That's called, there's two types of, there's practical science and there's theoretical science. When it comes to theoretical science, everything we know on a theoretical level can be summed up in one little 7-letter word. Do any of you know what word I'm thinking of? It describes all that we really know theoretically. One word. Nothing. Nothing. Every theory we have has some compelling reason why it cannot be true. Whether it be evolution, and somebody asked about it in the next class, I'll talk more deep depth about it, or the Big Bang, there are compelling reasons why it can't. And folk who study quantum, it appears that quantum particles behave one way when they're not being observed, and they behave a different way when they are being observed. Have any of you heard this?
Yeah, certain trainers can.
Oh, yes, yes. A few of you are raising on your head. Oh, yes. It appears that quantum particles can communicate with each other over millions of miles instantaneously, faster than the speed of light. And every quantum particle, you notice what every other quantum is, and notice what every other quantum is doing. So don't ever let anyone tell you that your science conflicts with your theology, because your science on a theoretical level knows absolutely nothing. And I say this with all respect. Hey, I believe strongly in studying science. I study it myself. I read a scientific article just about every day, whether it be biology, radio electronics. I'm an amateur ham radio operator. I mean, I got out of teaching, got into Lockheed because I studied electronics in the spare time. And that got me in the door at Lockheed for 27 years. I could not stand the deal with today's kids and their parents. Yes?
Personally, I feel like modern science is not going to get to the point where like the past was, because we don't acknowledge the spiritual aspect of life. You know, like, for me, there's a blend of.
I would not feel comfortable saying that myself. I'm glad somebody out here in the audience said it.
I'm not scared.
Well, all right, but in my
I'll say
case,
my
I
thoughts.
hope that to me, that's another, I'll tell you, I'm going to tell you, that's another example of that. The ancients never, ever, never, ever one time had anybody who was a religious skeptic. Not even one time. Every one of them believed in the gods. Now, granted, if the gods had a physical present temple, and of course, if you worship the sun, I mean, all right, the sun does at least exist. The moon at least exists. To worship the river at least exists. The planet Mars, yeah, it at least exists. But they never had a skeptic. You don't find any skeptics who come to Greeks. Yeah. I mean, the Greeks professed